There's a greenhouse on a street called Spooner Street in a fictional town called Quahog, Rhode Island. And in that house, on a couch that's seen better decades, sits a man in a white, short-sleeved shirt. He's large, round in a very specific way, like someone inflated him slowly and then stopped just before anything burst. He has a small chin, a flat sort of expression, and a laugh that sounds like it was invented by someone who had only ever heard laughter described secondhand. He's watching television. He's always watching television. And beside him, in various states of attention, is his family. His wife, who is far more capable than he deserves. His children, who range from quietly ambitious to genuinely alarming, and a dog who reads Hemingway and considers himself a serious literary voice. That man is Peter Griffin, and for some reason, he has been on our television screens for more than 25 years. I find that genuinely remarkable, if I'm being honest. Not because Peter Griffin is a good person, he's often not, or because Family Guy is a perfect show, it's famously not, but because this particular version of a certain type of man has endured across decades of cultural shifts, cancellations, revivals, format changes, streaming migrations, and just the general entropy that claims most television eventually. Peter Griffin outlasted all of it. He's still there. White shirt, same couch, same laugh, and I think there's more to him than most people stop to notice, not in a deep literary way, necessarily. The show isn't always interested in depth, but if you step back and look at the whole run of it, who Peter was at the beginning, where he came from, the things the show has quietly done with him over the years, there's an actual story there, a surprisingly human one, buried under all the chaos. So that's what tonight is. We're going to walk through the whole thing. Where Peter Griffin came from, how he got to that couch, what his life looks like when you lay it all out. His family, his friendships, his jobs, his feuds, his accidental moments of grace, and his many, many disasters. There's no rush. We're going to take our time with it. Family Guy premiered on Fox in January of 1999. It was created by Seth MacFarlane, who was at the time 25 years old, which is either inspiring or alarming depending on how you look at it. MacFarlane had made a short film at art school called The Life of Larry, and another called Larry and Steve, and Fox essentially said, "We'd like that, but as a whole show." And so Family Guy was born, built around a new family rather than a Larry family, with Seth MacFarlane doing the voices of Peter, Stewie, Brian and Quagmire all at once, which is a staggering amount of work that nobody ever seems to bring up. The show ran for 3 seasons, got cancelled, came back after DVD sales, and Adult Swim reruns proved there was a massive audience that simply hadn't been watching it at its original airtime, and has been running ever since. It's one of the longest running animated series in American television history. It's had more than 300 episodes. It's been to space, to hell, to the Death Star, to 1939 Poland, and to the last remaining blockbuster video. And at the centre of all of it, through every season, every cancellation, every revival, every cast change, every cultural moment, is this man. This round, impulsive, sometimes cruel, occasionally tender, perpetually inexplicable man. One thing I want to say before we get into it, just because I think it matters for how you hear all of this. Peter Griffin is not a sympathetic character in the traditional sense. He's not misunderstood. He's not secretly brilliant. He's not operating on a level that everyone around him fails to appreciate. He's a man of middling intelligence, enormous stubbornness, and a capacity for both great warmth and fairly spectacular selfishness, sometimes in the same afternoon. The show has never really tried to rehabilitate him. It's not interested in that. But there's a difference between a character being good and a character being real. And Peter, for all his cartoon physics and his cutaway gags and his inexplicable ability to survive things that should absolutely kill him, has a kind of realness to him, a consistency. You always know what Peter Griffin is going to do in a given situation, and you're almost always right. And that's not a criticism, That's character. That's someone who has been written with genuine internal logic. There's also something to say about what kind of show Family Guy is before we dive in. It is not a show that takes place in a consistent reality. Physics work when the story needs them to, and don't when the story needs something else. Characters remember their history selectively. The same event can have happened or not happened depending on which episode you're watching. It's a show that operates by its own dream logic, and Peter Griffin is the dreamer at the centre of it. Which means that his story isn't a story in the conventional sense. It's more like a portrait built up from hundreds of individual brushstrokes, none of which is definitive on its own, but which, together, give you a face you'd recognise anywhere. So, Peter Malone Griffin, born in Mexico, raised in Rhode Island, married to a woman whose family fortune he has never once deserved. Father of 3 children he loves imperfectly and loudly, best friends with a police officer, a sex-obsessed airline pilot, and a man who used to live in Cleveland. Employee of a brewery, sworn enemy of a chicken. That's the shape of the life, let's fill it in. Here's a thing about Peter Griffin that the show took its time revealing, and that doesn't get brought up nearly enough. Peter was born in Mexico, not metaphorically, actually born in Mexico, and for most of his adult life, technically undocumented in the country he considered home. The way it comes out is brilliantly mundane. The show reveals it through a standard Family Guy escalation. Some bureaucratic form gets filled out incorrectly. Someone checks a database, and suddenly it turns out that Peter's entire legal existence in the United States is questionable. His mother Thelma had briefly crossed into Mexico years before she gave birth, and not wanting to deal with the paperwork of declaring a child born abroad, partly out of embarrassment, partly out of the specific avoidance energy that runs in the Griffin family like a genetic trait, she simply never filed his citizenship papers. Peter came back to America as an infant, and everyone just assumed the rest had been sorted out. It hadn't. What follows in that episode is genuinely one of the show's stranger satirical moments. Peter has to take a naturalization test, fails it, and discovers in the process that his 20-year marriage to Lois may not even be legally valid. The Griffins are briefly displaced from their home and end up living in a settlement of undocumented immigrants near Carter Pewterschmidt's estate. Lois's extraordinarily wealthy and extraordinarily disdainful father, where Carter puts Peter to work as a servant. Peter, who can barely manage a single job under normal conditions, finds himself working the kind of physically grinding labour that makes him, for perhaps the first time in his life, genuinely empathise with people whose situation he'd never previously thought about. He forms friendships with the other workers. He rallies them. He briefly becomes a sort of accidental labour organiser, and then he accepts citizenship for himself, at their urging, because that's the deal Carter offers. And the show lets that sit there, with a quiet sort of ambivalence that's more honest than it has any right to be. He becomes an official American citizen. The family moves back to Spooner Street, and the subject is never substantially revisited, which is also very Family Guy. But the citizenship storyline isn't the most significant thing we learn about Peter's origins. That honour goes to a different secret, one that doesn't surface until season 5. The revelation that Francis Griffin was not Peter's biological father. Francis Griffin. Where to start with Francis? He was devout Catholic to the point of using his religion as a weapon. Stern, cold in the specific way that certain men of a certain generation are cold, not out of malice exactly, but out of an inability to express anything warm without it being immediately undercut by criticism. Francis visited the Griffin household periodically across the early seasons, and every visit felt like an inspection. He disapproved of Lois. He disapproved of the way Peter was raising the children. He once insisted Stewie be baptised and pushed him into a baptismal font that turned out to be filled with genuinely tainted holy water, which is a very Francis move. Peter's relationship with Francis was the relationship of a man who has spent his entire life trying to earn approval from someone who dispenses it in units so small they barely register. Peter loved his father. That comes through clearly in the episodes that deal with it. He loved him and found him genuinely difficult and wanted to make him proud in a way that never quite landed. Francis dies in season 5, and it happens with the kind of blunt absurdity that Family Guy does when it wants to be sad without announcing itself as sad. Peter, drunk at Meg's birthday party, rides a unicycle down the stairs. He falls. He lands on Francis. Francis is taken to hospital and dies there, his last words to Peter being, and this is the show's exact wording, "You're a fat, stinking drunk." Not quite the deathbed reconciliation. Peter, in grief, gives up drinking, then takes up crack cocaine instead, which the show plays entirely as comedy, but if you watch it with any knowledge of how grief and self-medication actually work, it reads as something considerably sadder than that. He goes through the motions of mourning a man he never fully understood and who never fully understood him. And then comes the hypnotherapy. Brian refers Peter to a hypnotherapist to help him stop the crack, and during the session, Peter uncovers a memory, Francis, at some point in Peter's childhood, telling him that he isn't his real father. Peter emerges from the session with this information and goes to his mother. Thelma confirms it. She had an affair with an Irishman while on holiday in Ireland. His name is Mickey McFinnigan. He lives in a place called McSwiggan Village. He is, from all available accounts, the town drunk. Peter and Brian travel to Ireland to find him. They locate Mickey in a pub called Wifey McBeaty's Tavern, because of course they do. And Mickey doesn't believe Peter is his son, so Peter does the only thing he knows to do. He challenges his biological father to a drinking contest. He wins. Mickey, deeply moved by this genetic evidence, accepts Peter as his child. There's something genuinely sweet about that. A man who couldn't quite earn his adoptive father's approval, earning his biological father's love through the one talent they share. It doesn't fix anything, really. Francis is still dead. Peter still grew up under that particular kind of conditional affection, but he gets something from Mickey that Francis never quite managed to give him: uncomplicated recognition. "I know exactly what this is," Mickey says essentially. "I've been doing it my whole life. You must be mine." Peter Griffin, it turns out, is Irish and Catholic, and technically Mexican. He contains multitudes. Peter's childhood is, like most things in Family Guy, told in fragments, cutaways, flashback episodes, offhand mentions that accumulate into something fuller than any single episode delivers. You never get a clean origin story. You get impressions, and the impression you get of young Peter Griffin is of a boy who was not particularly equipped for the world he was navigating, but who was doing his earnest, chaotic best. Thelma Griffin was the warmer parent by a significant margin. She was the kind of mother who enables without meaning to, who loves her child so thoroughly that she sometimes softens every consequence before it can teach him anything. There's a shape to that kind of upbringing you can trace in Peter's adult behaviour. He expects the world to absorb his mistakes. He's genuinely surprised when it doesn't. He rebounds from disaster with an ease that suggests he was never really allowed to sit in the wreckage long enough to understand it was his fault. Thelma dies in season 12, a stroke quietly, off the back of a storyline that the show handles with surprising restraint. Peter goes back to the family home to sort through her things and ends up having something like a genuine reckoning with who she was and what she gave him and what he never said. It's one of the episodes that reminds you the show's capable of doing that, of sitting still for a moment in the middle of all the noise. Lauren Bacall provided the guest voice for one of Thelma's associates in that episode, which is either a beautiful piece of casting or a coincidence that became one, depending on how you look at it. The relationship between Peter and his mother, across all the episodes that touch on it, is one of the show's most straightforwardly tender threads. She loved him. He knew it. That's not complicated, and the show doesn't try to complicate it. It's just the one parental relationship in Peter's life that didn't come with conditions or betrayals or hidden variables, and the loss of it, when it comes, lands with the specific quiet weight of losing the thing that was always simply there. Then there's the Griffin family mythology, which the show establishes through one of my favourite episode formats, Peter trapped in his panic room during a robbery, telling stories about the family's history to pass the time while the water level slowly rises around them because he accidentally set off the fire sprinklers with a flare gun. No notes. The stories Peter tells reach all the way back to the Big Bang, which was, according to Peter, God farting through a lit lighter. From there we get Peter in the Paleolithic, who invents the wheel, which immediately gets misused. We get Moses Griffin leading the Israelites out of Egypt. We get Nate Griffin enslaved and transported to America on a ship, who spends his captivity engineering elaborate pranks on the ship's captain, cutting the floor around his bed so that the captain wakes up and rolls directly into the ocean. Nate eventually becomes a slave to the Pewterschmidt family and marries a Pewterschmidt ancestor, which is how Peter and Lois are, in some vague and technically unverifiable way, cosmically connected long before they ever met. The show meant it as a joke, I think, but it lands as something almost romantic if you let it. There's also Black-Eyed Griffin, a silent film actor whose career ends when sound comes in, and Peter Hitler, Adolf's younger brother, who isn't evil, just deeply, personally annoying, an ancestor defined not by wickedness, but by the specific social crime of being irritating to be around, which is, honestly, a more accurate mirror of Peter Griffin than any of the heroic ancestors. What's interesting about Peter's relationship to this family mythology is that he believes it completely. He tells these stories with the full weight of someone passing down genuine heritage. The fact that he's doing it while water rises around him and his family is telling him he's going to drown them all doesn't diminish the sincerity. He finds meaning in these stories. He places himself in a lineage of people who caused disruption, occasionally helped someone by accident, and survived. That's not nothing. For a man whose relationship to history and education is largely adversarial, Peter is, by his own admission, not academically gifted, and the show has returned to this fact in various ways over the years. Having this family mythology gives him a place to stand. He comes from something. The thing he comes from is chaotic and imperfect and occasionally involved people getting pushed off boats, but it's his. One other thread from Peter's childhood worth sitting with: his relationship to Catholicism. Francis was deeply devout, and some of that landed on Peter, not as genuine faith exactly, but as a kind of ambient guilt that surfaces in specific moments. He knows what he's supposed to do, he just rarely does it. And when he doesn't, there's a flash of something. Not quite remorse, more like the feeling of a man who knows the rules of a game he's already decided not to play by. It's a very specific kind of religious upbringing, and the show captures it more accurately than you might expect. At some point in his young adulthood, Peter Griffin makes his way to Quahog, Rhode Island, and his life arranges itself around the woman who will define it. Lois Pewterschmidt, daughter of Carter and Barbara. Pewterschmidt grew up in genuine old money wealth, the kind of family that has a mansion, a yacht, and a name that appears on buildings. Educated, poised, and possessed of a particular kind of resilience that I think only comes from growing up in a household where warmth was conditional and appearances were paramount. Her father, Carter, is a man who treats people with undisguised contempt as a baseline setting and reserves his particular scorn for Peter, whom he views as roughly the level of household pest that you can't quite get rid of, but have eventually had to stop trying to exterminate. The show has never fully explained how Peter and Lois got together in the way that a drama might explain it. You get glimpses, a season 18 episode where a power outage leads the family to tell the story of Peter and Lois's marriage, set at Fenway Park in a flashback that has the warm, slightly hazy quality of a memory someone's been polishing for years. Young Peter, younger Lois, Carter disapproving in the background, with the vigour of a man who knows he's going to lose this particular argument and is furious about it. What we can infer is this: Lois chose Peter, which is the most remarkable fact in the entire show, if you sit with it. She had options. She grew up wealthy and presumably encountered men who could offer her stability, social standing, mutual comprehension. And she picked Peter Malone Griffin, the man who would one day cause a carnival ride to crash because of his body weight, who would befriend a chicken only to end up in a recurring war with it, who would at various points accidentally kill his father and become the mascot of a brewery and briefly be appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States. She picked him. Deliberately, I think the show's answer to why is that Lois was drawn to something in Peter that her upbringing had given her very little access to: genuine, unself-conscious feeling. Peter is not strategic. He doesn't calculate. When he loves something, he loves it completely and without irony, which in the world of the Pewterschmidts must have felt like a foreign language spoken very loudly. He was also probably funny to her, before the funny became a logistical problem. Carter Pewterschmidt's disapproval of Peter is one of the show's most consistent threads across all 20-plus seasons. He calls Peter by his name with the tone of a man who has been told the word and refuses to grant it dignity. He uses Peter as a servant when the opportunity arises. He sabotages Peter's employment, his self-esteem, his ambitions, and yet. There are episodes, more as the series goes on, where something like actual affection sneaks through. The bachelor party episode in season 8, where Peter discovers Carter never had a bachelor party and decides to throw him one at a place called the Fuzzy Clam. He gets Carter a lap dance. Carter, overwhelmed by the novelty of being celebrated, has a heart attack and falls into a coma. Peter doesn't intend to hospitalize his father-in-law. He just wanted to give him something nice. That tension between Peter's genuine warmth and his spectacular inability to deliver it without causing injury is the engine of the Peter-Carter dynamic and, in a way, the engine of Peter's life. Barbara Pewterschmidt, Lois's mother, gets somewhat less screen time but is a character in her own right. She's had her own affairs hinted at over the years, her own unhappiness within the gilded Pewterschmidt world. The women in Lois's family, the show gradually suggests, have made lives inside structures that don't quite fit them. Lois is the counterweight to Peter in every scene they share. She's more intelligent, she's more competent, she's better at most things than Peter is, including parenting, though the bar there is fairly low given the parenting competition she's in, and yet the show never reduces her to long-suffering saint or tragic victim. Lois has her own chaos, her cocaine period, her brief mayoral career, her stand-up comedy, her ability to be just as reckless as Peter when the right catalyst presents itself, which happens more often than you might think. Seth MacFarlane has said that Lois is partly based on classic American television wife archetypes, the Donna Reed model, the idealized homemaker, but placed into situations those archetypes were never built to handle. What happens to the cheerful, capable housewife when her husband accidentally capsizes a yacht, or when her family is briefly undocumented, or when she has to navigate her child's relationship with a literal giant chicken son? The show is, in some ways, an extended stress test of a certain kind of marriage. And the marriage holds, that's the thing. The Griffins are still together. The show has pushed them to breaking points, teased infidelity, explored the gap between what each of them wants and what they've ended up with, and they keep landing on each other. That might be the one genuinely sentimental commitment Family Guy has made and kept. 31 Spooner Street, Quahog, Rhode Island. Green exterior with a white trim. A garage that doubles as a laboratory for whatever the current episode requires. A kitchen where Lois performs the domestic labour that holds the household together with the quiet efficiency of someone who has accepted that this is simply what her life is. A living room with a couch positioned in permanent address of the television. A staircase, several bedrooms, and a panic room, as we've established, which Peter had installed at some point off-screen, and which says quite a lot about his relationship to preparedness. He has a panic room but no apparent emergency plan for anything that happens outside of it. The house is where most of Peter's story actually happens, which is easy to forget because so much of the show involves leaving it. But come back to the house. It's the fixed point. Everything goes wrong somewhere else and then returns to Spooner Street to be reset. Now, the family. Meg Griffin is the oldest child, and Meg's relationship with Peter is one of the show's longest running and, honestly, most quietly uncomfortable threads. The family uses Meg as a collective, emotional punching bag in a way that started as a recurring gag and has, over many seasons, accumulated into something that occasionally reads as genuinely bleak. Peter ignores her, dismisses her, openly forgets she exists in some episodes. There are moments where he causes her real harm, and the show doesn't entirely play it for comedy. The flood episode, where Peter sends Meg underwater to get him a beer and she nearly drowns, and Peter sits in the hospital room afterwards, genuinely reckoning with what he's done and promising to be better, is one of those. He doesn't become better in any sustained way, but he means it when he says it. And there are smaller moments, Peter realizing he misses Meg when she moves out, Peter defending Meg's honor when someone genuinely threatens her, where you see that the dismissiveness isn't the full picture. He does love her. He's just deeply, constitutionally bad at showing it, which is a pattern you can trace back through everything we've already talked about, really. Chris Griffin is the middle child and the sweetest of the three. His relationship with Peter is the least complicated. Chris needs guidance, Peter is unprepared to provide it, and yet the attempts are more genuine here than with Meg. The episode where Peter takes Chris to caddy at a golf course, intending to teach him responsibility, and then becomes so enchanted by Cleveland Jr.'s natural talent that he neglects Chris entirely. That's a small specific failure that the show presents without a big resolution. Peter doesn't fully realize what he's done. Chris forgives him anyway. Their relationship is a series of variations on that pattern. Stewie Griffin is the baby, and Peter's relationship with Stewie exists on a frequency that neither of them fully tunes into. Stewie is, depending on how the episode needs him, either a super-intelligent infant building weapons capable of ending civilizations, or just a toddler with unusually articulate opinions about things. Peter is, at various points, entirely oblivious to the fact that his youngest child is engineering his mother's death. He takes Stewie to Disney World. He brings Stewie along to an all-day golf game and lets him get so tan that Brian has to check him for skin cancer. He sits in the bath with him. They're oddly comfortable together in a way that might be because Peter is, emotionally, operating on a similar level of awareness. No notes. They just get along. Brian Griffin is the white Labrador that the Griffins have had since the early seasons, and Brian is, and this is worth just stating clearly, more of a flatmate than a pet. He drives a car, he holds sustained philosophical conversations, he's written a novel, published a play, hosted a public radio segment, he went to Brown. He considers himself a serious intellectual, which is undermined regularly, and to great comic effect by his actual behaviour. His relationship with Peter is the show's most consistent male friendship. Easier than Peter and Lois, less conditional than Peter and the broader friend group, more grounded in genuine enjoyment of each other's company. The friendship between Peter and Brian is one of those things that could have been purely comedic, the bumbling man and the pretentious dog, but the show has let it breathe into something real over the years. When Brian is killed by a car in season 12, Peter's grief is brief but unmistakable. When Brian is replaced by a dog named Vinny, the household functions but it doesn't feel right. When Brian is brought back via time travel, everything resets and the show moves forward, but the arc existed. The show told us how much Brian mattered by showing us what his absence felt like. The house absorbs all of this, all these relationships, all this love and frustration and chaos, and it persists. Floods have filled the living room to the ceiling. Fires have started in the garage. The whole structure has been at the centre of alien invasions, government investigations, and at least one incident involving a time portal. And it's still there, still green, still on Spooner Street. If the house on Spooner Street is where Peter lives, the Drunken Clam is where Peter exists. There's a distinction worth making there. The Drunken Clam is a bar, a fairly ordinary bar by the look of it, the kind of place that has been in the same spot for decades and will probably outlast most of the neighbourhood around it. The lighting is dim, the beer is cold. Horace, the original barman, a round, quiet presence behind the counter, tends to everyone without fuss. Horace eventually dies in a later season, struck by a baseball at a little league game, and the show treats it with a kind of muted acknowledgement you might give the closing of a local shop you've walked past your whole life. It's sad. And then the next episode starts. The Drunken Clam is where Peter and his friends gather, regularly, and without needing a specific reason, which is probably the most realistic thing about the show. It's not where they go for special occasions, it's where they go because that's where they go. Joe Swanson lives across the street from the Griffins, and has done so since the beginning. He's a police officer, he's paraplegic, his wheelchair is a constant of his character, and the show has done various things with it over the years, some thoughtful and some considerably less so. Joe is intensely competitive in a way that the chair has never diminished, which is maybe the most interesting thing about him. He has the energy of someone who decided very early on that his situation would not define his ambitions, and that decision applies to everything from police work to arm wrestling to his friendships. He's determined to be impressive at all costs. Joe's marriage to Bonnie is its own ongoing thread. Bonnie was pregnant for an almost cosmically extended period in the early seasons, a running joke that went on for years before she finally gave birth to a daughter named Susie. The marriage has its difficulties, its near endings, its quiet episodes of mutual neglect, but they stay together. And Joe's love for Bonnie, when the show chooses to show it sincerely, is the kind that you believe. Glenn Quagmire is, on the surface, the simplest member of the group, an airline pilot defined by an extraordinary and largely predatory enthusiasm for sexual conquest. Giggity is his catchphrase, if you can call a single absurd word a catchphrase. He says it in the way someone might clear their throat, reflexively, constantly, without quite meaning to. But Quagmire is a more interesting character than the surface suggests. He has a complicated relationship with his own lifestyle, one the show has quietly examined in later seasons. He discovers a teenage daughter he didn't know he had. He has genuinely deep feelings about things, including his friendship with Peter. That surface in moments the show doesn't always broadcast. And his running, intense, philosophical dislike of Brian, which includes a devastating monologue in one episode where he lists every specific thing about Brian he finds insufferable, is one of the show's sharpest character pieces. Because Quagmire is right about all of it. Brian is exactly the way Quagmire describes. The fact that the audience loves Brian anyway is its own interesting thing. Cleveland Brown is the gentlest member of the group, measured, kind, with a specific and very low threshold for the violence and chaos around him that he's somehow never been able to actually escape. Cleveland was spun off into his own show, The Cleveland Show, in 2009, where he moves to Virginia with a new blended family. The Cleveland Show ran for 4 seasons before being cancelled, at which point Cleveland and his family returned to Quahog in season 12 of Family Guy. It's one of those real-world television decisions that the show absorbed into its own mythology. Cleveland just comes back, because shows end and people return to the places that shaped them. The 4 of them together, Peter, Joe, Quagmire, Cleveland, have a specific texture as a friend group. They're not particularly sophisticated. Their conversations at the Clam tend to involve sports, complaints about their domestic situations, schemes of varying ambition and ill-advisedness. But the loyalty underneath all of it is real and consistent. When Peter's in trouble, Joe shows up. When something goes genuinely wrong, the group rallies. They're each other's fixed points in a world of constant chaos, which is exactly what the show needs them to be. And honestly, exactly what a lot of people need from their friendships too. Peter's place in the group is interesting because he's simultaneously the most chaotic member and the gravitational centre. The disasters that require everyone's involvement tend to originate with Peter, but the warmth that holds them together also, largely, comes from him. He's the one who notices when someone's birthday is coming. He's the one who decides they need to do something together and then executes that decision in completely the wrong way. The heart is there. The execution is just catastrophically unreliable. The camping trips specifically are worth a mention here. The show has sent Peter and the group camping on multiple occasions, and each time the specific dynamic of four grown men attempting to share a physical space while maintaining their friendships under slightly strenuous conditions produces something illuminating. Peter always brings too much of some things and too little of others. Joe's competitiveness surfaces in environments where there are physical challenges to complete. Quagmire's specific needs create frictions that are funnier in the woods than at the clam. Cleveland tries to mediate, and somehow they end up back in Quahog, with the friendship intact, and a story none of them will tell their wives the whole truth of. The Drunken Clam itself has hosted more significant conversations than it has any right to, given what it is. Confessions, plans, admissions that wouldn't happen anywhere else. There's a quality that specific bars develop when people use them as a regular gathering place, a kind of permission that the space grants, distinct from the permission granted by homes or workplaces. You can say things at the Clam that you can't say on Spooner Street, and Peter and his friends have taken full advantage of this across the whole run of the show. Whatever gets said there stays there, mostly. And what doesn't stay there usually generates the next episode. Peter Griffin has had an extraordinary number of jobs for a man who, by any reasonable measure, should have difficulty maintaining one. The show has cycled him through employment situations across decades with a creativity that suggests the writers understand there are only so many stories you can tell with a man sitting in an office doing the same thing every day. His primary recurring job is at the Pawtucket Brewery, makers of Pawtucket Patriot Ale, which is the beer Peter drinks exclusively, and in quantities that any sensible doctor would label a serious concern. The brewery is a real workplace with real colleagues and a genuine hierarchy, which means it provides the show with something useful, a place where Peter has to answer to someone. His boss for the longest stretch is Angela, played by Carrie Fisher, who has the energy of a person who has seen everything Peter is capable of and decided that the path of least resistance is managed disappointment. Angela was written out of the show when Carrie Fisher passed away in 2016, which the show handled by simply acknowledging her death off-screen in a season 17 episode. It was a quiet tribute to an actress who'd given the role more warmth than it strictly required. After Angela, the brewery changes management a few times. There's an episode in the later seasons where a new management team, an interracial husband and wife duo brought in to modernise operations, puts Peter through various trial roles to find where he actually fits. They eventually make him the company mascot, Pawtucket Pete, which sounds like a reward, but is actually the corporate version of finding someone a job where they can't do any direct damage. Peter, dressed as a patriot, appears at events. He enjoys this enormously, which tells you something. But the brewery isn't where Peter's professional identity actually lives. It's more of a staging post for whatever adventure he's about to have. What matters more across the show's run is the breadth of other employment situations he's somehow ended up in. There's the period where Peter becomes a news anchor at the local television station, which comes about because his hair turned white overnight during a ghost hunting trip, and a TV presenter named Tom Tucker decides the white hair makes Peter look distinguished. Peter can't deliver a real crime report, so Tom encourages him to simply make things up, which Peter does, blaming vague crime statistics on immigrants with the enthusiasm of someone who has never once considered consequences. This goes well, briefly, before landing him the job as Donald Trump's press secretary, which requires the family to temporarily relocate to Washington, D.C. before Peter resigns after the president behaves inappropriately towards Meg. In season 23, Peter ends up on the Supreme Court of the United States after bonding with Justice Brett Kavanaugh over a mutual love of beer during a brewery tour, at which point Kavanaugh apparently decides he no longer wants to be a Supreme Court justice and walks out. Peter is appointed in his place. He eventually passes a ruling that destroys the institution of marriage entirely in an attempt to protect equality, then is sent home. Kavanaugh returns to reclaim his seat. The institution of marriage is narrowly saved. Peter goes back to Quahog, Standard Tuesday. There's an episode in season 22 where Peter admits at the Drunken Clam, while discussing career regrets, that the brewery was never his dream job. It was just what happened to him. Each member of the group then shares what they actually wanted to be, and the conversation has a gentle 1 a.m. quality to it. A group of middle-aged men in a bar being quietly honest about the lives they ended up with versus the lives they imagined. It's one of those moments that the show earns precisely because it doesn't make a big deal of it. Peter's relationship to work is, in the end, a reflection of the same dynamic that shapes everything else in his life. He is capable of genuine enthusiasm and genuine warmth, but incapable of the sustained, disciplined effort that turns enthusiasm into achievement. Every job starts with energy and ends with an incident. The brewery tolerates him because the brewery has always tolerated him, and because at some point the cost of replacing him probably started to seem higher than the cost of keeping him. He's been there a long time, Peter Griffin. That counts for something, even when nothing else does. At some point early in the show's run, Peter Griffin is handed an expired coupon by a giant chicken, and something in Peter, something deep and apparently non-negotiable, decides that this is unacceptable. Not mildly annoying, not worth a brief complaint, unacceptable in a way that demands total, sustained physical response. And so begins one of the most beloved running gags in the history of American animation. The giant chicken's name is Ernie. He's a large bipedal chicken who wears human clothes and behaves in most respects like a person. His wife is called Nicole. He has a business, social engagements, presumably a mortgage. He is not, by any reasonable measure, an appropriate target for the kind of warfare Peter brings to their encounters. None of that matters. The first real chicken fight, which appears in a season 5 episode, starts in the street outside the Griffin house. It immediately becomes one of those things Family Guy does when it decides to commit completely to a bit and refuses to stop. Peter and Ernie fight their way through the street, into the sewers, onto a subway train, up the girders of a high-rise building under construction, into a biplane. The biplane crashes into a giant Ferris wheel. The Ferris wheel comes off its platform and rolls through the streets of Quahog, still with both men fighting on top of it. It eventually demolishes a 10-story apartment building. Peter and Ernie emerge from the rubble, look at each other, and in a moment of perfect absurdity, realise that neither of them can actually remember what they're fighting about. They apologise. Ernie invites Peter to dinner with himself and Nicole. They have, by all accounts, a lovely meal. And then the check arrives, and both Peter and Ernie insist on paying it. And before anyone can stop it, the fight starts again. Peter subdues Ernie with a pot of boiling water and drags himself home. In the kitchen of the restaurant, Ernie lies motionless on the floor, and then in close-up, his left eye opens. Dramatic music. The feud persists. Subsequent chicken fights escalate with each appearance. One fight ranges across time itself. Peter and Ernie land on Stewie's time pad mid-brawl and proceed to punch each other through various periods of history, eventually ending up in a genetic research lab, and then space, crashing back to Earth on an oil rig, before Ernie is seemingly killed by rocket engines. He isn't. He never is. The show has established that Ernie the giant chicken is, like Peter, essentially indestructible within the logic of this universe. There's a later episode where Ernie is admitted to the hospital, where Peter is volunteering as a nurse, apparently genuinely dying. Peter doesn't want to care for him. The history between them, the decades of mutual annihilation, makes the prospect of professional warmth feel absurd. But eventually, shamed into it, and then genuinely moved by it, Peter gives Ernie the treatment he needs, delivering it with the violent enthusiasm you might expect, and brings him back. And in the aftermath, Peter admits something that catches you off guard if you're not expecting it. The chicken completes him. Their rivalry, as stupid and destructive and inexplicable as it has always been, is something Peter actually needs. He also mentions with characteristic pragmatic honesty that saving Ernie was partly motivated by not wanting to be financially liable for the damage from all their previous fights. Both things are true. And then, in season 23, Ernie's son Nugget starts dating Meg. The feud passes to the next generation. Peter, who has spent so much of his adult life battering a giant chicken into unconsciousness over an expired coupon, now has to navigate the fact that that chicken's child might be his daughter's partner. The circle completes itself, as circles do in the most ridiculous way possible. What the chicken fights represent, at their core, is something the show has never needed to explain and is better for not explaining. They're pure escalation comedy, the premise that once a conflict starts, the only question is how far it can go before something finally stops it. And the answer is further than you think. Always further than you think. That's the joke, and it has remained funny across the show's entire run, which is remarkable by any standard, because pure commitment to a bit eventually wears out. But these don't. Something about Peter and Ernie still lands. Peter Griffin's body has been through things that should, in any physical universe, even loosely tethered to biology, have killed him several times over. The show uses this as a recurring source of comedy, and it is funny, but it also creates a strange mythology around Peter, this man who is at once deeply, comically vulnerable to injury and absolutely impossible to permanently harm. Take the hands. In season 5, Quagmire returns from Florida with fireworks. Because of course he does. And before Peter has enough time to finish explaining the name of a particularly dangerous firework he's assembled, it goes off. Directly. His fingers are severed and scattered. Peter has to go around Quahog collecting his own fingers in a bag to have them reattached. The show doesn't flinch from this. He collects the fingers. He goes back to work. His supervisor at the brewery tells him his productivity has waned, as if exploded fingers is a manageable performance note. There is the knee. I suspect if you show this video to anyone who's seen Family Guy, they'll know what I mean the moment I say it. There's an extended sequence, in a season 6 episode I believe, though it's been referenced and recreated many times since, where Peter injures his knee and the camera simply holds on his reaction to the pain. He says, shh, then breathes, then says, ah, then does it again. For what feels like an unreasonable amount of time, the sequence became an internet meme of some significance, which is appropriate because it's a perfect encapsulation of what the show does when it decides to treat cartoon pain seriously for approximately 45 more seconds than any other comedy show would. There's the stroke from burgers. Peter becomes so thoroughly consumed by a fast food restaurant, eating so many burgers that no reasonable body could absorb them, that he has a stroke. His left side goes numb for months. He eventually recovers through a stem cell treatment, which prompts him to infiltrate the restaurant's headquarters and befriend a genetically engineered cow who has been blowing the whistle on the company's practices. That's the recovery arc. Standard convalescence. His hair turns white overnight in a ghost hunting episode, which I've mentioned in passing already. This turns out to be cosmetically useful when Tom Tucker decides the white hair makes him look distinguished, and Peter briefly becomes a news anchor. The white hair stays for a few episodes and then quietly disappears. He loses his memory after being shoved by Richard Dawson, the host of Family Feud, after Peter becomes angry about losing a game. Peter regains his memory in a later encounter with the giant chicken, which does suggest that the only reliable cure for Peter Griffin's amnesia is physical confrontation with a poultry-based nemesis. He's rendered temporarily paralysed in various episodes. He's been shot, stabbed, blown up, dropped from significant heights, bitten by large animals, and in one episode had most of his body mass restructured by a sequence of events that the show treats as entirely reversible by the time the credits roll. There's also the period in season 10 where the Griffin family wins the lottery and Peter's absolute arrogance subsequently leads to complete bankruptcy. The emotional and financial destruction of that arc is treated partly as consequence, partly as comedy. He had enormous wealth, briefly, and then he didn't. The speed at which Peter can go from having nothing to having everything to having nothing again is almost geological in its efficiency. He doesn't linger in any state for long. And the coma that leads to the conversation with God in season 16, which I've touched on already, and will only nod at here. A stress-related heart event, a period of unconsciousness, and then whatever that conversation was. Peter comes back from it changed in no measurable way. Whatever he and God discussed, it doesn't reconfigure his behaviour or soften his character. He returns to the white shirt and the couch, and the show continues. The conversation happened. It mattered to Peter in a way that will probably never fully surface. And then Tuesday arrived and brought its own problems. What I find interesting about this parade of physical calamity is the logic underneath it. The show is telling us something about Peter through his body, that he is made of something that resists consequence. He feels everything acutely in the moment, often quite dramatically, and then he resets. The pain is real, but the damage doesn't stick, which is a different kind of resilience from competence or wisdom. It's the resilience of something that simply won't stop. That just keeps absorbing impact and standing back up, because standing back up is the only thing it knows how to do. You could read that as a portrait of a man who has never had to properly face consequences. Or you could read it as a portrait of someone who has learned, somewhere below conscious thought, that most things can be survived. Both are probably true. I lean toward both being true simultaneously, which is probably where the show would land if it ever stopped to ask the question directly. It doesn't ask the question directly. It just keeps Peter going, and going, and going. The most quietly extraordinary thing about the Peter and Lois marriage is how long the show has committed to it. 25 years. Countless opportunities to end it, or to meaningfully fracture it in ways that don't reset by the following week. And the show has never done it. Not really. Every push toward a breaking point lands them back together, and the landing never feels like a cheat. It always feels like the truth of who these two people are, even when it strains credibility. Which is interesting because the show is not particularly sentimental about relationships in general. It's had no trouble ending Joe and Bonnie's marriage temporarily. It had Brian die and come back. It divorced Beth and Jerry in season 3, partly as a result of Rick's manipulation. Wait, wrong show. It does feature a lot of marriages under strain, is the point. But Peter and Lois persist. Let's talk about what that persistence actually looks like when you walk through it. Brian's feelings for Lois are an early recurring thread. Brian Griffin, the dog, is in love with Lois Griffin, the woman. He doesn't always act on it directly, but it's there in the texture of his interactions with her. The slightly too close attention, the moments of genuine tenderness that tip just past what a family pet might reasonably feel. The show acknowledges this and then files it away. Peter mostly doesn't notice because Peter mostly doesn't notice anything below the surface of his immediate experience, which is both his greatest flaw and, in this case, his most convenient one. Then there's the memory loss episode. Peter is shoved by Richard Dawson at a Family Feud taping. I've mentioned this already in the context of the physical injury, but the marriage dimension of it is worth its own visit. Peter with no memory of who Lois is in the strange position of being a single man living in a house with an appealing woman he's just met. He finds her attractive. He starts to pursue other options as well. And Quagmire, who has been carrying a torch for Lois since roughly the pilot episode, sees an opportunity and invites her to dinner. What happens next is that Lois says something that lands emotionally on Quagmire in exactly the wrong way for his purposes. She's warm and genuine, and it makes him lose his nerve entirely. And Peter regains his memory after running into Ernie the chicken, and the marriage resets. What I like about that episode is what it suggests. Lois is not staying with Peter because she doesn't have options. She's staying with Peter because she has made a choice repeatedly over decades. Even when a smarter, more attentive, more functional man is right there, offering to take her to dinner. In season 21, there's an arc where Lois starts seducing Joe. This is not what it sounds like. She's trying to make Peter jealous rather than genuinely pursuing Joe. But it's still an interesting moment because it acknowledges a dynamic the show usually leaves subterranean. That Peter can take Lois for granted in ways that have real costs, and that she sometimes needs to remind herself she has agency. Peter does notice eventually. Not immediately, but eventually. The Lois as stand-up comedian arc in season 23 is one of the later show's best explorations of the marriage. Lois discovers she's funny, specifically because Peter's behaviour gives her material that other people immediately recognise and laugh at. She starts performing at open mic nights, then local venues, then lands a regional TV special. The joke of their life together turns out to have genuine comedic value to strangers. Peter finds out and is genuinely hurt, not angry in his usual blunt way, actually hurt. The idea that their private chaos has been made public, that he is someone's punchline, stings him in a way not many things do. He withdraws. Lois's material gets worse because she can't mind their dynamic when he's not being himself. And then when the audience starts turning on her, Peter simply walks back in and handles it, without needing to be asked, without making it about himself. He just shows up, and they quietly make up because the runtime is running out, which the show literally acknowledges, but the reconciliation still feels true. There's also the wedding flashback in season 18, which I keep coming back to as one of the better Peter and Lois moments in the later seasons. The Wi-Fi goes out at the Griffin house, and the family passes the time retelling the story of how Peter and Lois got married, set at Fenway Park. It has that quality specific to good flashback episodes, the hazy warmth of something being remembered fondly, even though the people remembering it are currently mid-argument about something trivial. Young Peter and younger Lois navigating Carter's disapproval and their own uncertainty and the specific chaos of trying to have a wedding when Peter is involved in any of the planning. They manage it. They always manage it. The marriage is not a good marriage by conventional standards. It probably shouldn't work, but it does work in the specific way that some things work precisely because neither party has ever seriously considered not making them work. And there's something genuinely comforting about that, I think. Something that earns the show's long-running commitment to keeping them together. Here's a piece of television history that I think doesn't get enough space in conversations about Family Guy. The show was cancelled. Not once, twice. And the second time it came back bigger than it had been when it left, which is not how television stories usually go. Family Guy premiered in January 1999, ran for 3 seasons, and was cancelled by Fox in 2002. The ratings had declined. The show felt like it had run its course in the way that networks decide things run their course, through a combination of actual audience numbers and an internal faith that dried up. Fox pulled it. That was supposed to be that. Peter Griffin's story was over. And then something happened that the television industry hadn't really encountered at that scale before. The DVD sets, those early season 1 and season 2 box sets that people were buying in significant numbers, started moving in a way that suggested a large, quiet audience had always existed for this show and had simply not been watching it at its scheduled time on Fox. Adult Swim started airing reruns and was pulling ratings that got people's attention. The audience for Family Guy, it turned out, hadn't gone anywhere. They'd just never been watching it the way network television expected them to watch things. Fox reversed course. They ordered new episodes, and in 2005, Season 4 premiered, and it felt different, more confident, more self-aware, more willing to go strange and stay there. The show had spent 3 years knowing it had been cancelled and not caring, which freed it up considerably. Peter Griffin's first act upon the show's return is to launch an unregulated pirate television station called PTV, which broadcasts whatever Peter wants, including something called the Side Boob Hour. The FCC, unable to shut down Peter's station, responds by starting to censor real life, placing digital black bars over actual people in their daily activities. It's a genuinely pointed piece of media satire, wrapped inside complete absurdity. The post-revival Family Guy had decided it wasn't going to apologise for anything. What the cancellation and return did to the show's DNA is worth thinking about. The first 3 seasons have a slightly different texture. They're warmer in some ways, more interested in conventional family sitcom beats, less committed to the pure, chaotic cutaway format that would define the show's later identity. The revival leaned away from that. It decided that Peter Griffin wasn't going to occasionally pause and be a normal father. He was going to be exactly what he was, always, and the show was going to follow that wherever it went. Seth MacFarlane has said in interviews that he wasn't entirely sure he wanted the revival. There's a version of the story where he was okay with Family Guy ending, where he had moved on creatively, and the return was largely a decision made by forces larger than his own creative preference. Whether that's entirely true or a comfortable piece of creative mythology is hard to know, but it tracks with something in the post-revival show, a slight loosening of emotional investment in the characters that coexists with a corresponding increase in willingness to be weird and experimental. The show has since referenced its own cancellation and revival multiple times, with varying degrees of self-deprecation. It's one of those shows that is highly aware of its own existence as a show, and Peter occasionally punctures the fourth wall in ways that acknowledge the strange afterlife they're all living together. The second cancellation, by the way, was a brief period in 2000. Fox moved the show around the schedule during Season 2. Ratings dropped, and it was officially cancelled again before the Season 3 episodes had all aired. Some of those Season 3 episodes eventually aired after the revival. The show has a complicated non-linear relationship with its own broadcast history, which feels appropriate for something that has now been on television in various forms for a quarter century. Peter Griffin is still on that couch, Fox is still airing it, and the DVD sales that helped save the show belong to a format that no longer exists in most households. Now, I want to spend some time just walking through some of Peter's best schemes and adventures in a more leisurely way. Not as a highlight reel, more as a wander through a very strange neighbourhood where every house has its own particular disaster going on inside it. Because Peter Griffin, for all his consistent character traits, generates a specific kind of story over and over again that the show has never got tired of exploring. It goes like this. Peter gets an idea, or a grievance, or a desire. He pursues it with absolute commitment and zero planning. Something goes wrong in a way that a moment's forethought could have prevented. Everything escalates. Eventually, there's a resolution that resets things roughly back to where they started. Peter has learned nothing. This is not a flaw in the storytelling. This is the storytelling. The Pawtucket Brewery Silver Scroll is one of the early classics. Peter, having apparently drunk Pawtucket Patriot Ale exclusively for some years, becomes determined to win the Silver Scroll hidden inside one of the beer cans. The winner gets a private tour of the brewery. He drinks a frankly alarming quantity of beer trying to find it. He eventually does. He and Brian take the tour, inevitably split off from the group to explore a room they've been specifically told not to enter, and find a prototype beer that apparently never goes flat. They drink it. They drink. They're ejected from the brewery by a very irritated Pawtucket Pat. Peter, furious, retaliates, and in the process of trying to show Lois how angry he is, sits down at a piano and discovers that when drunk enough, he can play beautifully. Lois, who teaches piano and has been struggling to find a student capable of competing in an upcoming competition, decides to enter Peter. She keeps him drunk for weeks to maintain his ability to play. He wins the competition and is unable to find the piano when he walks on stage. Lois has to physically turn him around and point him at it. They win. No notes. The Fat Rights movement. In Season 5, Peter has a physical and discovers that he is, medically speaking, obese. Rather than address this, Peter decides to found a civil rights organisation for large people, which he calls NAAFP, the National Association for the Advancement of Fat People. He lobbies for fat representation, fat accessible infrastructure, fat dignity. He also, at some point, opens a restaurant specifically for fat people, which he decorates with enormous furniture and positions as a safe haven. And then he bans disabled people from entering because he decides they're uncool, which is extraordinary, coming from a man who has just spent several episodes arguing for the dignity of an underrepresented group. Joe and a coalition of wheelchair users respond by forming a combined entity. The show calls it Crippletron, a reference to the sort of combining robot from children's animation that physically destroys the restaurant. Peter ends up wheelchair-bound himself for 2 weeks. He apologises to Joe. The restaurant is gone. We move on. PTV. This one deserves its place in the Family Guy canon as a genuine piece of satirical commitment. Frustrated with FCC censorship standards, after a broadcast incident, Peter launches a pirate television channel from the Griffin house and starts airing whatever he likes. The FCC, realising they can't shut him down because he's technically operating from private property, decides instead to expand their censorship operation to real life, sending agents out to place physical black bars over people in public, silencing anything they deem inappropriate. Peter wins a court case over the matter. The FCC retreats. PTV briefly continues to broadcast. The show was, for this episode, actually doing something pointed about broadcast standards and the absurdity of regulating content without ever quite admitting it was doing that. It hid the argument inside the madness, which is the best way to make an argument in a cartoon. The identity theft saga, involving James Woods, is a multi-episode arc that I find endlessly entertaining for the specific energy James Woods brings to playing himself as a villain. It begins when Peter and Brian track down the person who stole Peter's wallet from a Barry Manilow concert, where Peter was, apparently, without judgment, and discover it's James Woods, who has not only taken the credit cards, but has decided to steal Peter's entire identity. He moves into the Griffin house. He tells the family his name is Peter. Joe, operating in a state of procedural helplessness, has to enforce this because James has the paperwork. Peter is displaced from his own life. Brian is put on an outdoor leash. The retaliation, naturally, involves Peter and Brian assuming James Woods' identity in return and living James Woods' life for a while. Things escalate in that specific James Woods way that always implies genuine menace beneath the surface-level absurdity. Carter's bachelor party is one of the quiet gems of Season 8. Peter learns in passing that Carter Pewterschmidt has never had a bachelor party. His marriage to Barbara was arranged in the way that old money marriages apparently were, without the kind of chaotic pre-wedding celebration that Peter considers essential human experience. Peter decides with real warmth and genuine intent to throw Carter one. The party takes place at a venue called the Fuzzy Clam. Peter arranges a lap dance for Carter. Carter, who has apparently never experienced anything quite like this, becomes overwhelmingly enthusiastic and has a heart attack. He falls into a coma. The family is summoned, and Peter, now operating in the absence of the man who controls Pewterschmidt Industries, is handed the reins of a major corporation by Lois, who inherits control. He fires the entire board. He hires Mort Goldman, Quagmire, and Bryan. He creates products including something called the African American Heart Monitor, a cereal called Jeremy Irons cereal, a product called Scream in a Box, and a refined variant called Lady Scream in a Box. Carter recovers, understandably horrified, and attempts to reclaim his company. This ends with a convoluted, fake swamp monster scheme, engineered by Lois, that somehow also involves Hugh Laurie in character as Dr. House appearing as an actual swamp creature. Carter gets his company back. Peter considers it a fair trade, and I could keep going. Peter becoming the brewery mascot Pawtucket Pete, and then losing the mascot role to Bryan and responding by destroying a parade balloon. Peter as a food truck owner. Peter as a deaf DJ. Peter briefly running the entire town of Quahog by default after a series of civic collapses. Every one of these follows the same architecture: idea, commitment, escalation, mild catastrophe, reset. The formula is the comfort. You know the shape of it before it starts, and the pleasure is in seeing what particular flavour of chaos fills that shape this time. Let's go back to the panic room for a moment, not because we're in danger, but because I want to spend a bit more time with the Griffin family history, as Peter tells it, because it rewards the attention. The episode is called Untitled Griffin Family History, and it unfolds like this. Robbers break into the Griffin house at night. The family flees to Peter's panic room, a small steel chamber in the house with monitors, no phone, and a flare gun that Peter fires almost immediately, activating the fire sprinklers and slowly beginning to fill the room with water. Trapped, with limited options, and rising water, and Meg having been captured by the robbers, who mistake her for a boy, Peter does the only reasonable thing available to him and starts telling stories about the Griffin family across history. What follows is one of the show's most enjoyably sprawling cutaway sequences, structured as a series of mini-sketches that build a mythology of the family across thousands of years. I've touched on these already, but there's more to say about what the full picture adds up to. Peter, in the Paleolithic, invents the wheel. This is presented as a genuine achievement. The wheel is a good idea, a world-changing idea, but Peter has the immediate, impulsive energy of a man who invented something and doesn't quite understand what he's invented yet. He doesn't sit with the achievement. He moves on. There's something in that image that rhymes with every Peter story we've talked about tonight. Moses Griffin leads the Israelites out of Egypt. He's commanding, he's charismatic, he parts the sea, or arranges for it to be parted. He's operating at a scale that the average Griffin ancestor does not generally reach. But even here, the show can't resist undercutting it slightly. There's chaos in the delivery, as there always is. Nate Griffin is the ancestor the show handles with the most care relative to what it is. He's enslaved and transported to America, and Peter tells his story with a specific kind of seriousness that the surrounding material doesn't always maintain. Nate's response to his situation is to prank the ship's captain, to find the one form of agency available to him and use it brilliantly. He cuts the floor around the captain's bed, and the captain wakes up floating out to sea. It's both absurd and, read a certain way, quietly heroic. A man in an impossible situation, expressing his humanity through mischief. Nate eventually becomes enslaved to the Pewterschmidt family and marries a Pewterschmidt ancestor. This is the connection the show draws between Peter and Lois. They are not just a couple who met in Quahog. Their families have been intertwined for generations, in the most problematic and complicated way the show could devise. The show presents this mostly as a joke about destiny, but there's something in it that makes the Peter/Lois marriage feel less like an accident and more like something that was always going to happen in one form or another. Black Eye Griffin, the silent film actor, is a small character, but a telling one. Someone in the Griffin line who found a form of expression that suited him perfectly, a medium built on physical comedy, on big gestures, and exaggerated faces and the absence of complicated language. And then watch that medium evaporate when sound technology arrived, which is, in its own way, a portrait of someone who was perfectly calibrated for a world that changed on him. You can feel a version of Peter in that, a man whose specific strengths would have served him beautifully in a different context. Peter Hitler is the one that says the most about how Peter sees himself in history. His ancestor wasn't the architect of great evil. He wasn't the one making the decisions, wasn't the one whose name carries the weight. He was just the annoying brother, defined not by what he did, but by the specific social crime of being tiresome to be around. And the show presents this as the Griffin contribution to that particular period. Not complicity in something terrible, just being irritating. It's a very particular kind of self-awareness wrapped inside a very particular kind of deflection. What I find genuinely interesting about these stories, taken together, is that Peter clearly believes them in a way that gives him something. He has a mythology. He has ancestors who were present at important moments, who contributed in small and large ways to human history, who were funny and flawed and occasionally effective and sometimes just deeply annoying. He belongs to something. For a man whose actual origins were complicated, a father who wasn't biologically his, a mother who didn't file his citizenship papers, a biological father he only located through a drinking contest. Having this family history, even a partly invented one, is a kind of anchor. He tells these stories while water rises around him and his family argues, and the situation gets objectively more dangerous. He keeps telling them. He finishes them. That's the most Peter thing in the whole episode. There is a version of Family Guy that people remember almost exclusively as a cutaway gag machine, a show that interrupts itself for a non sequitur joke, resets, interrupts itself again, and asks nothing of your emotional investment in between. And that show exists, it's real, but running alongside it in the same episodes and sometimes in the same scenes is a show that is genuinely capable of landing something true. The moments when Peter Griffin gets serious, when the show slows down and sits still and asks you to feel something rather than laugh, are not numerous, but they're there, and they matter more because of the noise surrounding them. The flood episode is the one I keep returning to. A heavy rainstorm escalates into a flash flood. The ground floor of the Griffin house fills with water, and the family needs to evacuate. Before they can do that, Peter sends Meg into the kitchen to get him a case of beer and a sandwich. The fridge is mostly submerged. Meg goes underwater to get it. Her blouse catches on a rack inside the refrigerator. She can't get free. She begins to drown. Peter goes in and pulls her out. She's unconscious. They get her to hospital. She's in a coma. And there's a scene in the hospital room where Peter sits and thinks about all the things he's done to Meg. Not a cutaway list, just Peter, sitting, processing. He makes her a promise that if she wakes up, he'll do better. He'll treat her better. He'll be a better father. The show doesn't play this for comedy. It sits with it. Meg wakes up. Peter, for a stretch of episodes, is actually kinder to her. He shows up. He tries. He's overprotective in a different way than his usual dismissiveness. Suspicious of her new boyfriend. Hovering rather than absent. He eventually gets it wrong in new ways, but the trying is real and the show doesn't take it back. It doesn't last, not in any permanent sense. By the time the season changes, Meg is largely back in her usual position in the family dynamic. But the episode exists. The promise existed. The fact that Peter made it and meant it, even if he couldn't sustain it, is part of who he is. Francis's death is a different kind of serious moment, one that the show approaches through comedy and grief simultaneously, without fully committing to either. Peter's reaction to losing his father is to overcorrect wildly rather than sit with the grief, which is recognisably human, even in its absurdity. He gives up drinking. He picks up crack. He throws himself into a hypnotherapy session that opens up something far larger than he was prepared for. The revelation about his biological father doesn't resolve the Francis grief. It complicates it. Now he has to process not just the loss of a man, but the loss of the particular story he thought his life was built on. The specific loneliness of learning, too late, that the approval he spent his life chasing was conditional in ways he didn't fully understand. The show doesn't linger on this. It moves through it at pace, finds jokes in the journey to Ireland, ends with a drinking contest. But underneath the pace there is something real being acknowledged. A man whose relationship with his father was incomplete, working out what that means now that the chance to complete it is gone. There's a smaller, more specific moment I want to mention because I think it's one of the show's best pieces of understated character work. The golf episode in Season 2, where Peter takes Chris to caddy at a public course, intending to teach him responsibility. Cleveland Jr. turns out to have extraordinary natural talent, and Peter becomes so absorbed in coaching him that he gradually forgets about Chris entirely. He doesn't notice he's done it. He's not being deliberately cruel. He's just been genuinely captivated by someone else's potential and wandered away from the actual purpose of the day. Chris, feeling abandoned, goes and confides in Quagmire at a strip club. A waitress there gives Chris the more sensible advice of giving his father another chance, and by the end of the episode, things are approximately fine. The reason I find this one affecting is that Peter's failure here is so ordinary. It's not a spectacular disaster. It's the quiet, common failure of a parent who gets distracted by something more exciting than what was right in front of him. It's recognizable. It doesn't need to be resolved with an explosion or a scheme or a set piece. It just needs Chris to choose to forgive him, which Chris does because Chris is a fundamentally kind person who inherited that from somewhere that wasn't the chaos. And there's a moment I want to return to briefly. Lois's stand-up comedy arc. Not to re-explain it, but to add one note. When Lois's stand-up comedy audience turns on her, Peter doesn't warn her it's coming. He doesn't announce himself. He just walks in and deals with it. No speech about how much she means to him. No grand declaration. Just presence. When presence was what was needed. It's the simplest and most accurate version of what Peter Griffin, at his best, actually is. Not a man who says the right things. A man who shows up. The conversation with God, the season 16 finale, where Peter falls into a coma after a stress-related incident and has a conversation with God in whatever space exists between consciousness and not, is the show doing something it doesn't often do, which is let Peter Griffin be genuinely thoughtful and contemplative. The conversation is quiet. It doesn't have a punchline that undercuts it. God doesn't give Peter answers that transform him. They just talk, in the way that someone at the end of their rope might talk to whatever they believe is listening, and Peter goes back. He always goes back. The thing about all of these serious moments, taken together, is that they form a quiet second script running underneath the comedy, a script that says, this man has been through things. He has sat with losses and with failures and with the specific grief of a man who wanted more from certain relationships than he received. He has made promises he couldn't keep. He has seen people he loves hurt and been, in some cases, the cause of that hurt. He carries all of it in his own undramatic way, in the way that a lot of people carry things, not by addressing them directly, not by processing them cleanly, but by continuing to move and continuing to love the people in his life, and continuing to show up in the ways he knows how to show up. The show has never asked us to admire Peter Griffin. It has only ever asked us to recognise him. And most people who have watched it for any length of time have found in that recognition something worth returning to. Family Guy sits in a strange and specific spot in the history of animated television. Not quite where The Simpsons lives, not quite where South Park lives, doing its own thing in the territory between them. The formal innovation, the cultural irreverence, the specific flavour of chaos. It found its lane and stayed in it. The Simpsons comparison is the one that has followed Family Guy from the beginning, and honestly, it makes sense on the surface. bumbling father, capable wife, family in a mid-tier American town. Seth MacFarlane has addressed those comparisons over the years with varying degrees of patience, but the shows feel different when you actually watch them. Homer Simpson's relationship to intelligence is cosmic and sad. There was even an episode that revealed his potential had been suppressed by a crayon lodged in his brain since childhood. It's a tragedy dressed as a comedy. Peter Griffin's relationship to intelligence is different. He's not someone who could have been smarter. He's someone who is exactly as smart as he is, and the show has never once suggested otherwise. There's no crayon. There's no suppressed potential. He's just Peter. The two shows eventually acknowledged each other in season 13 of Family Guy, The Simpsons Guy, an hour-long crossover episode that is, in its own way, a remarkable piece of television. The Griffins end up in Springfield. The casts interact, and Peter and Homer eventually fight. A long fight, a sustained fight, played partly as homage to the giant chicken battles. Peter wins, which is either the show being bold or being honest about its own energy, depending on how you feel about it. The cutaway gag. This is Family Guy's actual formal contribution to the grammar of comedy television, and Peter Griffin is the engine of it. The basic structure is familiar. Peter says, "This reminds me of," or "That's almost as bad as," or simply gets into a situation, and the show cuts entirely away to something unrelated for 30 seconds to 3 minutes, then returns to exactly where it was. The Simpsons had done cutaways and sketch comedy shows had done non sequiturs, but Family Guy formalised it into a regular structural device in a way that influenced a decade of animated comedy writing. Bob's Burgers, American Dad, The Cleveland Show, all shows that exist in a post-Family Guy formal landscape, working with or against the cutaway gag as a structural baseline. Whether this is a good thing is genuinely debatable. The cutaway gag is wonderful when it lands, and when it's not used as a substitute for story. At its best, it creates a kind of associative dream logic. The show says something, reminds itself of something else, goes there, comes back, and the two things are both funnier for having been next to each other. At its worst, it's a way of avoiding the harder work of building a scene. The show has done both, often in the same episode. Peter Griffin's other contribution to the cultural record is the giggity trajectory, the way that phrases and sounds and moments from Family Guy have embedded themselves in internet culture in a way that's become almost invisible. People quote this show without knowing they're quoting it. Bits from Family Guy are so thoroughly absorbed into the texture of online humour that their origin is often invisible to younger audiences who encountered the meme before they encountered the show. That's a specific kind of cultural legacy, not the high art kind, but real. The 300th episode of Family Guy, which aired in season 16, was used to deliver one of the show's better late-era character moments. Stewie's admission in a therapy session that his British accent is a psychological construct, not a real part of who he is. It's a strange choice for a milestone episode, to use the occasion not for celebration, but for revelation. But it's a Family Guy choice, which is to say it prioritises the interesting thing over the expected one. And somewhere in the lineage of the bumbling television patriarch, Ralph Cramden, Archie Bunker, Al Bundy, Homer Simpson, Peter Griffin, is a story about a certain kind of man, a certain kind of marriage, a certain kind of household in a certain kind of America. Each iteration raises and lowers the temperature in different ways. Peter is angrier than Homer sometimes, and more tender than Archie almost always. He's funnier than Al Bundy in a broader register, and stranger than Ralph Cramden in ways that cartoon physics makes possible. He's his own thing, but he's also part of something that American television has been telling for 70 years. The story of the man on the couch who isn't quite what his family deserves, and who loves them anyway, imperfectly and loudly, and without much sophistication, but consistently, always consistently. The modern seasons of Family Guy, let's say season 16 and beyond, have a different quality to them than the peak years. That's not a criticism exactly, more of an observation about what happens to a show that has been running for this long. Things settle. The show finds its cruising altitude. Peter Griffin at this point is less a character being discovered and more a character being inhabited. Everyone involved knows exactly who he is, which creates a kind of comfort and also a kind of predictability that are two sides of the same coin. Cleveland returned to Quahog in season 12 after the Cleveland show was cancelled. His return was handled as naturally as these things can be handled. He's back, the family's reconstituted, and the core dynamic of the drunken clam reassembles itself as though it never changed. Cleveland's new wife Donna and their blended family came back with him, which added new characters to the supporting rotation. The show absorbed it without much ceremony, which is both very Family Guy and also, honestly, very true to how real friendships work. When someone comes back after a period away, you catch up briefly, and then it's as if they never left. The season 20 episode where Peter and Quagmire accidentally swap personalities by exchanging underwear at a laundromat is a late-era highlight, and I think it's genuinely underrated as a piece of character writing. The premise is absurd in the way that Family Guy premises are absurd, but what it requires the show to do is be extremely precise about what specifically makes Peter Peter and what specifically makes Quagmire Quagmire. Because to play the swap convincingly, you have to understand the original. The episode shows quietly that the writers still know these characters in a granular way after 20 years. Peter behaving like Quagmire is funny because we can feel how wrong it is. Quagmire behaving like Peter is funny for the same reason. The wrongness proves the rightness of the original. In season 22, there's an episode where the Pawtucket Brewery does a construction-related temporary shutdown, and Peter ends up working at a supermarket, the Stop and Shop, much to Lois's irritation, because grocery shopping is one of the few spaces in her life that feels entirely like her own. Peter inevitably colonizes it. His presence makes the space hers no longer. The episode is at its core about the way that people who love each other can inadvertently take over each other's private spaces. And the resolution, Peter getting himself fired so Lois can have her thing back, is one of the show's quieter and more considerate endings. There's an arc in season 22 where Meg serves as a surrogate mother for Bruce and Jeffrey, two recurring characters who are a gay couple, and it gives Meg, briefly, a genuine source of meaning and purpose. The baby's eventual departure is handled with more softness than Meg's stories usually get, and Peter's response to having an infant in the house temporarily is pure Peter, delighted, chaotic, completely unprepared, which is to say, it's the truest version of who he is around small things. He's good with babies, not in a competent way, in the way that babies don't require you to be consistent or rational, and so Peter's particular brand of impulsive warmth is exactly what they need. Season 23 gives us Meg dating Nugget, the son of Ernie the chicken, which I've mentioned briefly already, but want to return to because of what it does structurally. It takes the most recurring bit in the show's history, the Peter versus chicken feud, and gives it stakes it has never had before. Peter's daughter is in love with his mortal enemy's child. The two men who have been trying to destroy each other since an expired coupon now have to navigate a family dinner. The show lets this land with real comedic weight because we've been watching these two fight for so long that the idea of them having to coexist at a table is genuinely funny, without any setup required. Season 24 is the ongoing season as of this recording. Contemporary Quahog. Peter in his white shirt. The mix of episodic chaos and the occasional character beat that the show has always been. There are holiday specials now on Hulu, which gives the show a different kind of presence, less dependent on weekly appointment viewing, more available in the way that streaming makes things available, accessible at odd hours by people who want company at 1 a.m, which is, when I think about it, one of the most honest descriptions of what Family Guy has become. companion television. The show you have on when you want something familiar, something that will behave exactly as expected, something that will be there in the background of a quiet evening without demanding too much. Peter Griffin, in his white shirt, on his couch, in his greenhouse, generating disasters and surviving them and loving his family in his crooked way. It's comforting in a way that deliberately thoughtful television rarely manages to be. Not because it's deep, because it's consistent, because you always know what you're getting, and knowing what you're getting sometimes is exactly what you need. The show has outlived careers, cultural shifts, technology formats, platform changes, and 2 cancellations. It's on its 2nd generation of fans now. People who grew up watching their parents watch it and came to it as their own thing later. The cutaway gag is absorbed into comedy DNA so thoroughly that people don't associate it with Family Guy specifically anymore. The characters have become something close to cultural furniture, present in the background of a certain kind of household without needing to be specifically chosen. Peter Griffin is still on that couch. He's still wearing the white shirt. He's still watching television. And Lois is still somewhere nearby. And the kids are still in their rooms. And Brian is still on the couch beside him. And somewhere in the neighbourhood, Ernie the chicken has his eye open. One of the things that keeps Family Guy feeling inhabited across all the seasons is the depth of its supporting cast. Quahog is not just the Griffin house and the drunken clam and the brewery. It has a whole population of recurring faces that give the world texture. And a lot of what makes Peter's story feel like a story is the way those faces keep showing up around him. Doctor. Elmer Hartman is the Griffin family physician, and he is, there's no diplomatic way to put this, a terrible doctor. Not merely an average doctor, genuinely, consistently, heroically bad at his chosen profession. He diagnoses things incorrectly. He confuses his own conditions with his patients. He has delivered advice that would constitute medical negligence in most jurisdictions, and yet the Griffins keep going to him, because Quahog apparently only has the one. Peter has had more interactions with Dr. Hartman than any doctor-patient relationship should reasonably involve, and most of them have ended with Peter in a worse state than he arrived in. There's an affection for Dr. Hartman in the show that doesn't quite map onto admiration, more like the specific fondness you develop for a familiar incompetence, something that has become part of the furniture of your life, even though it probably shouldn't be there. Mayor Adam West is one of the show's great recurring characters, and his presence in the show is inseparable from the actor who played him. The real Adam West, who voiced the character from season 1 until his death in 2017. Mayor Adam West is, to be generous, an eccentric civic leader. He operates on his own internal logic that makes complete sense to him and no one else. He hoards cats. He launches them from a crossbow. He makes civic decisions that defy both bureaucratic and natural law. He was, for an extended period, in a relationship with Peter's mother. The show treats all of this with the specific warmth reserved for something beloved and strange. When Adam West died, the character was written out through his own death in season 17 in an episode called Adam West High. The show dedicated the episode to him. It was genuinely touching. A mayor of a cartoon town being mourned, in real terms, because the man who brought him to life was gone. Herbert is a character the show handles, not always well, as a creepy elderly neighbour whose intentions toward the teenage boys in the neighbourhood, Chris in particular, are clearly and darkly inappropriate. The show plays this as comedy, which is a choice that has dated in ways the earlier season's sensibilities don't always survive intact. He has an ancient dog named Jessie, who has died and been resurrected in various forms across different episodes. Herbert himself has been to war, it's eventually revealed, and there's a season 9 episode where he and Chris bond over their mutual distrust of another man who seems to be targeting Chris. It's one of the more tonally complicated things the show has produced. Not entirely successfully, but with genuine effort. Tom Tucker is the local news anchor and one of the show's great incidental comic presences. He delivers absurdity with the flat, authoritative cadence of someone who's been reading local news for 30 years and has either not noticed or stopped caring that the stories are increasingly surreal. His relationship with his own career, the self-regard, the faded small-market glamour, the specific sadness of someone who probably thought this was going to be a stepping stone, is sketched in quickly across many episodes and adds up to something that feels real. Mort Goldman runs a pharmacy in Quahog and exists in that particular supporting character space of someone who is always around, but whose presence is never quite the point. He's anxious, he worries about everything. His wife Muriel was killed in the Season 9 murder mystery episode at James Wood's mansion, along with several other characters, in what was the show's most committed single-episode attempt at a Clue-style whodunit. Mort eventually remarried. Life continues in Quahog as it always does. Angela, as I've noted, was Peter's supervisor at the brewery for years, played by Carrie Fisher. She was a woman who had made peace with her situation in the way that some people make peace with their situations. Not happily, exactly, but fully. She knew what the brewery was. She knew what Peter was. She managed both with the resigned efficiency of someone who stopped being surprised years ago. When Fisher died and Angela was written out, the show replaced her with a new management team, and the specific dynamic of Peter reporting to someone who simultaneously despaired of and protected him was lost. Not irreplaceably, but noticeably. And then there's Carter Pewterschmidt, who I've talked about at length already, but who deserves mention here in the context of the supporting cast because he functions differently to the Quahog neighbours. Carter isn't part of Peter's daily world. He's the world Peter married into, the world that never fully accepted him. He's a recurring antagonist and occasional uneasy ally, and the relationship between them, the contempt that coexists with the shared experience of loving the same woman, is one of the show's most consistent character threads. Carter will probably disapprove of Peter until one of them ceases to exist. That's its own kind of fidelity. What all these characters share in relation to Peter is that they form the walls of his world. The world is made of these people. Their presence makes Quahog feel like a place rather than a backdrop. And Peter Griffin, for all his chaos and all his impulsiveness and all the ways he has failed to notice what's right in front of him, is unmistakably the centre of gravity that holds all of them in orbit. They exist in some sense because he exists. Quahog is his world. It always has been. Peter Griffin is a New England Patriots fan. This is not incidental to his character, it's structural. Sports fandom, in Family Guy, is one of the clearest windows into who Peter is when he's not performing anything. The Patriots have been to the Super Bowl an almost implausible number of times in real-world terms, which means that Family Guy has had a lot of occasions to incorporate them into storylines across the show's run. Peter's fandom is the absolute, non-negotiable kind. He watches the games with the intensity of a man for whom the outcome has genuine emotional stakes, which is consistent with everything else about him. Peter doesn't do anything at a medium level. He's either completely invested or completely oblivious. There is no moderation. Sports provides something for Peter that most other parts of his life don't, a legible framework for caring about something. He can be passionate about the Patriots without anyone questioning whether he should be. Nobody asks him to justify it. It's just allowed, the way it's allowed for millions of people, a space where enthusiasm doesn't need to be earned or explained. It just is. The show has taken various runs at the Peter sports fan angle. There are episodes built around specific games, specific seasons, specific moments in Patriots history. There are cutaways that use Peter's sports fandom as a lens for other things. The way he applies sports logic to situations where sports logic is wildly inappropriate. The way his team loyalty overrides any other consideration when the two come into conflict. He has missed important family events for games. He has made decisions about friendships based on team affiliations. He has probably, on some level, structured significant portions of his personal schedule around the NFL season for decades. What's interesting is how the show uses Peter's sports fandom to illuminate his relationship with community. The Griffins don't have a lot of standing in the larger social world. They're not wealthy. They're not particularly respected. Carter Pewterschmidt looks down at them. The town has mixed feelings about Peter's various schemes and disasters. But at the game, in the stands or on the couch in front of the television, Peter is equal to everyone around him. The shared experience of supporting a team erases most of those distinctions. It's one of the things sports does that people don't always acknowledge. It creates temporary clean equality. Everyone's hopes rise and fall on the same play. For Peter, who navigates most of his social world with some awareness of his own inadequacy, that equality is probably quietly precious. There's also golf. Peter and Chris go on a father-son camping trip in season 2, where golf becomes the central activity, and Peter's discovery of Cleveland Jr.'s extraordinary natural ability at the sport sends him down a path of displaced mentorship that costs him his relationship with his actual son for most of the episode. Golf represents something specific for Peter. Aspiration, maybe, or the fantasy of an activity that rewards patience and precision. Two things he catastrophically lacks. He keeps trying golf. He keeps doing it badly. He keeps finding it meaningful. And there's the time Peter joined a rodeo in season 8, which goes exactly as badly as you'd expect. He's overmatched. He's knocked around. The whole enterprise is a disaster. But he signed up. He got on the thing. That's a piece of Peter's character that sports brings out clearly. The physical confidence that sometimes outpaces the physical reality. He believes, with total sincerity, that he can do these things. He's wrong almost every time. He tries anyway. Since we're on the topic of things Peter loves with undivided enthusiasm, beer. Pawtucket Patriot Ale, primarily, but beer in general, as a philosophical position. The brewery isn't just his employer, it's his spiritual home. The place where the thing he loves most is literally produced, where the culture around it is formalized, where being someone who understands and appreciates beer is treated as a genuine credential. The episode where Peter wins a tour of the brewery by drinking an enormous quantity of Pawtucket Patriot Ale is, in one reading, a story about determination and resourcefulness. In another reading, it's a story about a man who found a talent and deployed it with complete commitment, regardless of the consequences to his liver. Peter's hobbies, more broadly, because there are hobbies beyond the sports and the beer, tend to be the kind that require enormous enthusiasm and minimal skill. He has tried and briefly mastered things across the show's run: cooking, music, various forms of physical performance, various crafts and trades. The mastery is always temporary, the enthusiasm is not. He brings to every new interest the full and complete attention of a man who has not yet been disappointed by this particular thing, and that specific kind of fresh enthusiasm, over and over again, is one of the most consistent sources of warmth in his character. There's also, it should be said, his relationship to food, which functions less like a hobby and more like a philosophical position. Pawtucket Patriot Ale is the clearest example. He doesn't just drink it, he is loyal to it in the way that people are loyal to places they grew up. It represents something to him. Comfort, probably. Familiarity. The specific flavour of an evening that is going well. He has, across the show's run, eaten quantities of food that would put most people in hospital and showed no particular lasting effects, which feeds back into everything we talked about regarding his body's relationship to consequence. He eats with the same quality he brings to everything. Complete investment, no restraint, and a total absence of the voice that might say, perhaps this is enough now. That lack of an internal governor is, I think, the truest thing about Peter Griffin. Not stupidity. The show has never really been interested in Peter as stupid in the clinical sense. More like a complete absence of the mechanism that most people have, which pauses before a decision and asks, "Is this wise?" Peter doesn't have that pause. He never has. And everything that follows, every scheme, every disaster, every moment of accidental grace, flows from that one constitutional fact about who he is. Section 17. _End Family Guy is, among many other things, a musical show. Not in the way that a musical is a musical, not structurally, not thematically, but in the way that a show can develop a deep reflex for song as a mode of expression, deployed unpredictably and often brilliantly across its run. Peter Griffin has sung a lot of songs, so has Stewie, so has the whole family, in various configurations. The show has a musical vocabulary that sits alongside its comedy vocabulary, and the two aren't always distinct, because the best Family Guy musical moments are funny and sincere at the same time, which is exactly the combination that makes music work in animated storytelling. There's the piano scene I've already mentioned, Peter, drunk, playing beautifully at Lois's piano competition, which is the show establishing early that music lives somewhere in Peter's character, buried under everything else. When his usual defences are removed, by alcohol, by crisis, by some other state that gets him out of his own way, there's a musicality there. The show doesn't make this a recurring thing. It uses it once precisely, and then moves on. But the implication stays. The Star Wars parodies, which span from Season 6 through Season 9 in a trilogy of full-length episodes, feature Peter as Han Solo across all three. The casting is elegant in the way that the best casting is elegant, not because Han Solo and Peter Griffin are similar people, but because the show understands exactly how they differ and plays that difference for everything it's worth. Han Solo is roguish and capable and strategically brilliant in a rakish way. Peter Griffin wearing Han Solo's clothes and voice is just Peter Griffin, impervious to the mythology around him, confused by the Force, irritated by protocol, basically fine with the Empire on an abstract level until it becomes personal. The parodies include original songs and musical moments within the Star Wars structure, and they work partly because the show commits to the scale of the source material with complete seriousness, while filling that scale with Peter's specific incompetence. Blue Harvest, the first Star Wars parody, was a full hour. Something Dark Side followed as the Empire Strikes Back installment. It's a Trap closed out the Return of the Jedi section. The three together represent the show at its most formally ambitious, the longest sustained narrative it had attempted, parodying one of the most structurally rigid mythologies in pop culture, while somehow making Peter Griffin the centre of it and not having that feel wrong. The show has produced original songs of genuine quality across its run. The Conway Twitty interruptions, extended, completely real segments of Conway Twitty performing his songs inserted into Family Guy episodes as a running gag, are one of the show's purest, absurdist commitments. There's nothing funny about the Conway Twitty footage itself. What's funny is the show's total commitment to playing it straight, to letting the man perform for as long as he performs, to refusing to undercut it. The joke is that there is no joke, and the longer it goes, the funnier it gets, which is a specific kind of comedy that only works if you trust the audience to follow you somewhere quite far from a recognisable punchline. Peter himself has sung at various points in the show's run, usually in musical cutaways, sometimes in full scenes. His voice in Seth MacFarlane's delivery is actually rather good when the show wants it to be. MacFarlane has genuine vocal ability, which Family Guy deploys strategically. Brian Griffin sings occasionally too, and the show has used musical moments between characters, particularly between Stewie and Brian, to do some of its most emotionally honest work. The Stewie/Brian dynamic has a musicality to it that shows up in some of the Road 2 episodes in ways that don't always get credited in the broader conversation about the show. There's something about music in animation that bypasses the defenses you bring to dialogue. A character can deliver an expository line and you can process it analytically, Assess whether it's true, whether it's fair, whether it advances the story. A character singing the same sentiment does something different to you. It goes around the analytic layer. Family Guy has known this for its entire run, and it uses music at specific moments to achieve effects that the ordinary vocabulary of the show can't reach. Peter at his most open, at his most undefended, at his most genuinely himself, is Peter with a drink in his hand and a song available to him, not performing for anyone, just feeling something and not managing to keep it in. I want to spend a bit more time on Brian and Peter specifically, because I've mentioned their friendship across several sections now without ever really sitting down inside it, and I think it deserves that. Brian Griffin arrived in the show's very first episode and has never left. He is, in the most literal sense, a white Labrador that the Griffins keep as a family dog. He is also, in every practical sense that the show concerns itself with, a person with opinions and preferences and a literary career of variable quality and a capacity for self-deception that the show finds endlessly useful. Brian went to Brown. He has tried to write a novel. He has published a play that opened and closed in one night, which the show treats not as something to be mourned, but as a fact about Brian that he has had to absorb and continue living with. He dates women who are sometimes his intellectual equals and sometimes not, and the gap between who Brian believes himself to be and who he actually is in practice is one of the show's most reliable comic engines. His friendship with Peter is strange when you describe it in purely external terms. A middle-aged working-class man and a dog who considers himself an intellectual. They live in the same house. They drink together. They go on adventures together that neither of them would volunteer for if the other weren't involved. They argue. They have genuinely different values about most things, and they are, without any real qualification, each other's closest friend. Part of what makes the Peter and Brian dynamic work is that they need each other in complementary ways. Brian needs Peter's unself-consciousness, needs to be around someone who acts without calculating, who commits to things without thinking them through, who doesn't spend 3 hours in his own head before doing anything. Peter is allergic to the overthinking that Brian is addicted to. Being near Peter interrupts Brian's particular cycle of self-analysis and forces him into the present. That's useful for Brian, even when it's also exhausting and occasionally dangerous. Peter needs Brian's judgment, even when he ignores it. Brian is the voice in Peter's life that occasionally says, "This is a bad idea. Here is specifically why it is a bad idea. Here is a slightly better idea." Peter doesn't always listen, doesn't often listen, but the voice is there. And there are moments, more than you'd expect spread across seasons, where something Brian has said earlier in an episode comes back to Peter and influences what he does, quietly, without announcement. The trip to the brewery Silver Scroll, which I've talked about already, that's Brian and Peter. The journey to Ireland to find Mickey McFinnigan, that's Brian and Peter. The identity theft saga, the various road trips, the schemes that require a co-conspirator, almost all of them are Brian and Peter. When the show needs Peter to have someone to talk to who will push back without completely abandoning him, it reaches for Brian. The death and revival arc in season 12 is worth revisiting in this context. Brian is killed by a car, hit in the street, gone. The family adopts a new dog, a Rhode Island mutt named Vinny, voiced by Tony Sirico. Vinny is actually a good character, warm, funny, his own thing. The show wasn't wrong to try him, but the household without Brian felt off in a way that the show couldn't quite correct for by introducing someone new, no matter how well crafted that someone was. The emotional architecture of the show had Brian built into it. Peter without Brian was Peter missing a specific kind of ballast. Stewie uses time travel to bring Brian back. Everything resets. The show has not killed Brian again. There's an episode in season 5 where Brian ends up in a brief entanglement with Stewie that requires him to admit, in an unguarded moment, the full extent of his loneliness. And there are episodes where Peter does the same thing, obliquely, where the bravado drops for a second, and you can see a man who is genuinely glad that someone is still there. They are, both of them, lonely in specific ways that the other partially addresses. Not fully, but partially, which is probably more than either of them expected from a dog and man friendship that started because Peter drove past a talking dog on the street and offered him a lift. The show has never needed to explain why Brian and Peter are friends. It's just true. They've been friends since the first episode. They'll be friends in the last one. Whatever the last one turns out to be. One thing I haven't given enough space to tonight is the sheer geography of Peter Griffin's life. The places the show has taken him that are very much not Quahog, Rhode Island. Because Peter Griffin has been to space. He has been to hell briefly, and to heaven and to the past in several different centuries, and to the future in at least a couple of configurations. He has been to Washington, D.C. as press secretary to the President of the United States. He has been to Ireland to find his father. He has been stranded on various alien planets, and in various dimensions, and in at least one pocket reality that shouldn't technically exist. He has been to Iraq, which the show handled with the specific tonal uncertainty of late 2000s American comedy trying to address an active conflict. He has been to the Death Star. He was Han Solo on the Death Star, which is a sentence that still makes me smile a little every time I think about it. The Road to episodes, which feature Brian and Stewie rather than Peter as their central duo, are the show's most formally ambitious travel stories. Brian and Stewie have been to the North Pole, to England, to Germany, to various points in history, to alternate dimensions, to a fictional utopia, to the multiverse itself. Peter doesn't anchor those stories, but he exists around them. The world that Brian and Stewie return to after every adventure is the world that Peter sits at the centre of. He's the fixed point they come back to. Peter's own adventures beyond Quahog tend to have a different texture than the road to episodes. Where Brian and Stewie's travels are often philosophical, concerned with identity and possibility and the nature of reality, Peter's travels are concerned with whatever Peter is immediately concerned with. Getting somewhere, finding something, surviving something, and then getting back to the couch. He doesn't collect experiences in the way that a different kind of traveller might. He accumulates incidents. Places happen to him rather than being sought out. The Grand Canyon episode is a good example of this. The family drives to the Grand Canyon for a road trip. Stewie is accidentally left behind. The episode splits between the family's increasingly desperate attempts to enjoy the trip without the guilt of leaving their infant, and Stewie's increasingly resourceful attempts to survive and navigate home alone. Peter's experience of the Grand Canyon is, essentially, the experience of a man who is physically present at one of the natural wonders of the world and primarily concerned with whether the hotel has a good pool. The world offers him grandeur. He accepts something more immediate. Ireland, though, Ireland gets through to him. Something about being in the place his biological father is from, in the specific earthiness of it, the pub culture that rhymes with everything Peter already is. That trip lands on him differently. He finds Mickey McFinnigan, and he fits there, in that pub, in that contest. There is a version of Peter Griffin that grew up in Ireland, and it looks almost exactly like the version that grew up in Rhode Island, which says something interesting about what is nature and what is nurture in the making of him. The Washington, D.C. period in season 17 is brief. The family relocates, Peter takes the press secretary job. Things go wrong relatively quickly, but it's one of the show's stranger experiments with displacement. Taking Peter out of Quahog and putting him in a position of genuine political proximity is a test of what happens to his character when the familiar world is removed. The answer is that he's still Peter. The world changes around him, but he doesn't change with it. He behaves at a press briefing the way he behaves at the Drunken Clam, which is to say, freely and without calculation, and the consequences are predictable. He resigns. The family comes home. There's a specific kind of comedy that comes from taking a character who is perfectly calibrated for one environment and dropping them in a completely different one. Peter Griffin in Washington, D.C. is funny for the same reason Peter Griffin in the Galactic Federation's prison would be funny. Or Peter Griffin as Han Solo is funny. Not because he's lost exactly, but because the new environment's rules simply don't apply to him. He operates by his own physics in every context. The context changes. Peter doesn't. And then he comes back to Quahog. He always comes back to Quahog. The world beyond Spooner Street is interesting for the duration of an episode or a brief arc, but the show isn't interested in Peter as a traveller or an explorer or an agent of change in any larger world. The show is interested in Peter on his couch, in his town, with his family and his friends, and his ancient ongoing beef with a large bird. That's where the story lives. Everything else is a detour, and the detours are good, but the destination is always the same greenhouse, which is, again, something the show figured out very early and has never seen fit to question. Why would you want to be anywhere else, really, when home is right there? So, let's just sit with the full picture for a moment. Peter Malone Griffin, born in Mexico, raised in Rhode Island, the son of a woman who loved him uncomplicated, and the adopted son of a man who loved him conditionally, and the biological son of an Irish drunk he didn't meet until middle age. Married to a woman who was the better choice in every pragmatic sense and who chose him anyway, over and over across decades. Father of 3 children, he loves imperfectly, which is the only way he knows how to love anything. Friend to a dog who reads serious literature, and a police officer and an airline pilot and a man who used to live in Cleveland. Employee of a brewery that has tolerated him through disasters that would have had most people escorted off the premises and told not to return. Sworn adversary of a giant chicken for reasons that started with an expired coupon and have never fully resolved. That's the whole shape of it when you lay it out. It's a strange shape. It doesn't fit any of the conventional templates for what a life is supposed to look like, but it's a life, a full one, in its own chaotic way. I've been thinking, as we've walked through all of this tonight, about what it is that makes Peter Griffin endure as a character when so many others haven't. There are shows that were more critically acclaimed, more culturally respectable, more formally ambitious. There are characters who were more comprehensively written, more consistently intelligent, more reliably good. Family Guy has never claimed the high ground on any of those fronts, and I think that's been one of its quiet strengths. It never promised you something it couldn't deliver. It said, here is a loud, impulsive, warm-hearted, often oblivious man, and his strange family, and their small world. Come along if you like, and people did. Season after season, they kept coming back. Part of what I find genuinely interesting about Peter as a character study, and I'm aware that calling Family Guy a character study is the kind of thing that could get you laughed out of a serious conversation about television. But stay with me, is that the show has never tried to redeem him in the way that prestige drama redeems its complicated leads. There's no arc where Peter fundamentally changes and becomes a better person. There's no season finale where he earns the love he's been given. He just keeps being Peter, and the love keeps being given anyway. And the show seems to understand that this is actually the more honest portrait of how human relationships work. People don't change into better versions of themselves for the people they love. They stay largely themselves, and the love absorbs that, and the whole thing continues. Lois knows who Peter is. She knew when she married him. She knows now, and she's still there. Jo knows who Peter is, the chaos, the schemes, the nights at the Drunken Clam that were supposed to be brief and lasted until midnight. The disasters that somehow always orbit back to his address. He's still there. Brian knows who Peter is better than almost anyone in Quahog, has seen the full measure of him up close for decades, and he's still on the couch beside him. That's the testimony that matters more than any character arc. Not that Peter improved, that the people who know him best stayed anyway. Now, talking a bit about the specific feeling of spending time with something like this late at night. Because that's what this is, isn't it? A late night thing, a winding down thing. I think there's a reason shows like Family Guy end up as companions for people at the end of the day. Not because they're designed for it, not because anyone planned it that way, but because the kind of familiarity this show generates, after a season, after 10 seasons, after all these years, becomes genuinely comforting. You know the voices, you know the rhythms, you know the shape of any given story before it ends. And that predictability, which critics sometimes describe as a problem, is for certain purposes a feature. The world is unpredictable enough. Sometimes what you want at the end of it is something that behaves exactly as expected, that gives you exactly what you came for, and then lets you rest. Peter Griffin in his white shirt is, in that sense, a small piece of stability. Not inspiration, not improvement. Just something that has been there a very long time and shows no signs of going anywhere. And there are stranger things to find comfort in, honestly. There are worse places to spend an evening than Quahog, Rhode Island, a town where nothing is quite right and everything is somehow fine, where the drunken clam is always open and Horace is usually behind the bar, where Joe Swanson is patrolling with the intensity of a man determined to protect something worth protecting, where somewhere in the sky above the houses a giant chicken has one eye open and is thinking about an expired coupon with an intensity that will never diminish. The greenhouse at 31 Spooner Street has its lights on. The television is going. Brian is on the couch with a book he may or may not finish. Stewie is upstairs, either sleeping or building something he won't explain. Meg is in her room with hopes that the show has never quite given their due and probably will. Chris is somewhere being gentle and confused and fundamentally all right. Lois is doing something competent and necessary that nobody in the household has noticed needs doing. And Peter is on the couch. He's probably watching the game. He's probably thinking about what he wants for dinner. He's probably, at some level below conscious thought, aware that the people around him are his, and that this awareness is the most important thing he knows, even if he couldn't articulate it, even if tomorrow he'll do something that suggests he's forgotten it entirely. He hasn't forgotten it. He never has. It's just buried under everything else, the way the most important things sometimes are. The way they are for most people, if you're being honest about it. I've got a whole collection of other Quahog stories I'm planning to cover in future videos, if you're interested in spending more time here. There's enough in this world to keep us going for a while. Stewie's story alone could fill an evening, that arc from murderous infant to actually quietly loving member of a family that he pretended for years not to care about. Brian's literary career and its spectacular inconsistencies, the full history of Quagmire, who is a more complicated character than he's usually given credit for. But for now, that's Peter Griffin, the man in the white shirt, the man on the couch, the man who once challenged his biological father to a drinking contest to prove his paternity and won, who once drove the entire economy of the Galactic Federation into collapse through a single keystroke, who once sat by his daughter's hospital bed and promised to be better, who once stood at the edge of something dangerous and just stood there, and then walked away because the person waiting for him on the other side was real, and the other thing wasn't. There's something worth naming at the end of all this about what it means to have followed a character for this long and still find him interesting. Not inspiring, not aspirational, not a role model in any conventional sense, but interesting in the way that honest portraits of human imperfection are always interesting, because they show you something about yourself that you recognise without quite wanting to acknowledge. The things Peter does badly are things people do badly. The things he gets right in the specific, accidental, imperfect way that people who aren't trying to be heroes sometimes manage to get things right. By showing up, by staying, by loving something even when he doesn't know how to love it well. That's the whole thing, really. After all the noise and all the chaos and all the expired coupons and the exploded fingers and the brewery and the couch and the giant chicken with his one open eye. That's the whole thing. Good night, Quahog. Good night, Spooner Street. Good night, Peter Griffin. Sleep well. Quahog will still be there in the morning.